This episode contains language that is not suitable for minors. Please enjoy responsibly. And now, today's episode. Hello and welcome to the Beatdown. This is episode 51, I believe. 51. I'm Tony. I'm your host. I'm joined by my friends Chris Hewlin and John Rosso.
At some point, we're going to reach my age.
Yeah. Well, we'll reach all of our ages soon. Thanks for inviting us to your birthday party. That was a good time.
It was a good time. I enjoyed myself quite a bit. I found myself sort of a little. I wish I had worked the room a little more, but it was fun.
Yeah, there's only so much you can do. I mean, you look great. You're dressed smartly.
I believe it's called To the Nine.
Who are the two guys sitting across from you?
So that's
because you kept them at close quarters. It was either that or you were keeping them away from certain other elements.
Yeah.
No, actually, well, there was a little bit of seating scrambling that went on. So right across from me was supposed to be so I had Ethan to my left. I had Paul, diagonal. Straight across from me was my friend Jeff Packman, who's the president of Domino Music Publishing.
I would like to have met him. That's interesting.
Well, that was kind of the thing is I put him there so that he could because he wouldn't know anybody else. But then so I put Pat on one side and I put Paul on the other and Ethan, and that's the thing. So he ended up chatting away with Pat the whole night. So
good.
But yeah, well, you could have come over too, but that's okay.
That's true.
No, the thing that kind of fell through is right. Like I had it. I thought about it greatly. Like I had little John down one end and I had Jim down the other. And then I was going to have Doug and his wife next to Jim. I thought that was going to be an interesting conversation. And then you were next to them. And that kind of all fell apart when Doug got sick and wasn't able to make it. So I thought that would be an interesting dynamic. But
I missed the cocktail hour. So I feel like that's why I didn't get a chance. You might have
thought about that a little bit.
I didn't get a chance to mingle because I missed the cocktail hour.
The cocktail hour was just sort of a beforehand thing if anybody got into the city early, but it was 7 to 9 dinner. You don't want to hear about the it was like different places cost different we were gonna have sit down dinner, we're gonna have stand up, at the end of the day, like I said, I mean, you overthink everything.
It's way fun just to get together and stuff like that. We're just talking about the seating. No one's talking about the whole whole thing on a whole. It was fabulous, and thank you.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah, it was a great place. I like. That's the thing is, I wanted to sort of bring it up a little and just let's go to a dive bar and hang out. Yep. I think and it's just so complicated to get people together on what night of the week. Like if I did it on a weekend, I might get more out of towners. If I did it during but then I'd lose the locals that go out of town on the weekend.
Yeah.
And then people. So the end of I actually had my guest list was 18 more people than you saw there. So it was almost twice as many people, which ultimately was more cost effective.
Saved you thousands of dollars.
That's right.
So,
the idea of having the kind of food that you had too was a good idea. So it wasn't like a full heavy meal. You got to sit.
Well, that's it was sort of that's generally the way they do those things where it's you pick so many entrees and they bring them out, but and they pace it and it was open bar, so that's what half of us are there for anyway. So
right. We're not there to see you. We just want free drinks.
And I was happy, at the same time, it was I'm not giving them a set list, a playlist, but they mixed it up really well. It
was all cool. That was it. It was fun. And the cheese was okay. You were
it was fun cheese.
Yeah. Right. Agreed.
Yeah. So
agreed. That was fun.
Happy New Year, guys. I think this is our first. Hey, are we just maybe this is a little off the air stuff, but are we up to date? Is everything released that we've recorded at this point?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is brand fresh 24 Sia 2023.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. Totally. I wanted to bring up in our text thread earlier in the week, there was the Smashing Pumpkins post, and everybody bashed the idea about they're looking for a guitar player.
They're sort of guitar player of like 17 years who I couldn't even possibly name, who was the guy who after the band kind of fell apart and they both it's a second guitarist. It's not James Iha.
Yeah, it's actually like a third. Right, it's like a third.
It was
person
a third guitarist who's been there with him for a long time. All of a sudden,
okay.
Like recently, they announced that he was leaving, and it was one of those things. Sound like he's like, you're not paying me enough or something kind of thing. But they didn't. I'm insinuating that.
How legit was the one ad?
Completely. So they're literally on Green Day's doing this stadium tour and they're like the sub headliner, because Green Day hasn't been around for a while and they're doing a half a dozen shows or something like that in the U.S. and they're doing Europe, but it's all stadiums. And
so for people who are listening, you sent like the one ad that the Smashing Pumpkins had put out.
It was an Instagram posting
looking for, hey, want to play guitar in the Smashing?
Yeah,
isn't there a part of you guys that didn't immediately just go like, Billy Corgan doesn't know somebody? Like he doesn't have a buddy that's like,
no, they're opening it up. It's great. So my thing was that I know you guys all were like, my thing.
Chris, just really sorry, Tony,
go ahead.
Chris, but. Would we, if we're now talking about Smashing Pumpkins, it's a genius idea to open it up. He might have somebody and he knows exactly who it's going to be.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to be suspicious like that. I'm like,
no, okay, fine. Yeah. But there's another part of me that's just like, oh my God, like, Billy Corgan can't find a guy to put can't get a guy to play it. Like,
I'm surprised he didn't announce. I'm surprised they didn't announce that there's going to be an AI search to find a new guitar.
Yeah, or what I was thinking is, who wants to be the next guitar player for Smashing Pumpkins? Some kind of reality show. So I kind of went down this rabbit hole of I started thinking. You mentioned that they have 11 albums out.
Yeah.
So I figured as a minimum, that's got to be like 120 songs you'd have to learn.
No, Tony.
I know. Hold on. Let me finish.
I know that much of a set.
No, I know. So there's a potential of 120 songs, right? And then I said, I know like about 70. In the Pedestrians, we probably do like 70 something, and then with the other band, we're doing. So it's like, what would it take to learn like that amount of songs? And then I
20 songs.
Well, right. So I then went to set list and said, well, what's a recent set list like? And its average is about 20 songs. And I said, okay, that's more reasonable. But they do, when you look at those lists, there are more than 20 songs. Like they'll pull in other songs. They change throughout the course of
that was the other band. That's also it's the thing that I would be more likely to be concerned about, where all of a sudden they go, so we've decided the month of June is we're going to play Melancholy from front to back.
But tire out, right?
Right. That's, but once again, they're opening for Green Day. So it's probably even tighter than the 20 songs. Mm-hmm. It's the songs that, the
hits.
It's probably a hit. They're not dropping like then they're doing separately a headlining tour where Weezer is like the opening act too. So I understand your concern, but that also, I would guess depending on who the guitarist is or whatever too, it might be that would also maybe influence some of the set list, right? It's like how loose it is, and my guess is they're not jammy in the hippie kind of way, but they're probably loose. Like you need to be able to shred. I don't know. I was wondering that. So, and the other thing I was wondering is that, right? So I started looking at, because I have three other records up to that double record that you mentioned, but they recently, one of their recent releases was a rock opera. And I was like, what if you had to learn that from start to finish? How feasible would that be? I mean, that might be there. I would think, you have to learn that from like, I would think it's going to be a greatest hits show.
So follow me on this one. So I then started to say, like, okay, if you had the opportunity to audition for them, you'd probably have to know like 5 songs, right? And I said, is that a reasonable amount to say? Like you'd have to know like 5 songs to go on an audition?
Oh my God. I think there's going to be, like, if he's doing that, there's going to be some fetishists out there that's like, it knows everything and plays it just like Billy Corgan.
Well, that's what I'm
trying. Those parts, but you can play in the band just in case Billy's not feeling it that night.
That's what I'm trying to get at. So then I said, as a personal challenge, I said, I know one song. I know today. I know that song. But what would it take how long would it take to learn some other songs? So I went back and I started working on Siva, I think is how you pronounce it, off the first record. Mm-hmm. And, and I spent time learning that song. And then I went in and started learning Cherub Rock. And this is just from like Thursday on. And just to get an idea of like, what would it take to like learn that amount of material? Because it's like, I'm sure all the guys that we're friends with that play in bands, we know a lot of material, but to learn all that from one band, if I'm going to do the rehearsal, I'm going to learn the Gish record and be like, no, fuck you. Like, I'm just playing this as my rehearsal. And if this doesn't prove to you that I'm going to be able to learn your bullshit, could it?
But I'll play anything you want on this record right now.
Could it be done? Go. Yeah.
So you show up and he goes, we're going to play
off the rock opera.
We're going to play Giant Steps by Ornette Coleman.
I would be, no, that's not going to happen. It's it's going to be like, what do you know off of the Joshua Tree? It's that era of them that's going to be.
What if you show up? What if you show up and you go, okay, we're going to play the entire whole Live Through This album for my audition.
You know what? That'd be a great show.
Yeah.
So in one of the
up there, right.
In one of the set lists that I looked at, they covered Thunderstruck, and then like on another set list they covered some other AC/DC song, and then in the one set list I looked at that I think it was like an average. It took an average of the year and it said, boom, there's your 20 songs. Yeah. One of them was a Manfred Mann song, and it wasn't Blinded by the Light. And
that's not a Manfred Mann song. That's
I know, it's a Bruce Springsteen song. I know.
John, I do think, like, if you walk into a rehearsal, like, it's not, you don't have to jam, but you have to be able to jam, which means when someone goes, I want to be your dog, you better be right on that. You know what I mean? Like, you're just going to, like, certain things are just going to have to happen. Now, if you're not even there, then you're just like, you know what? Next.
Well, I am not a musician.
We're the Smashing Pumpkins.
I'm not a musician, but I would think, just like anything else, there's, like, the expectation is, okay, you're here because your tape has shown me that you actually know how to play, right? So the skill set is now at nuance. It's not at sort of capability, or we find out that you were full of shit with your tape. But the reality is you now it's about vibe, right? It's like I'm
sure Jimmy McCullough comes into the Wings band and starts playing like 50 songs with Paul to really prove his mettle.
Yeah.
But do you think those are all Beatles songs, or they're just anywhere and everything?
They're probably Eddie Cochran songs.
Yeah. Eddie Cochran, right. Buddy Holly, but anything he wants, and you better be on that. Or it makes him more comfortable. Like, it might be the thing that pushes you over.
But that's the thing, but that might also be, right? Depends on, why am I bringing this person? What is this person supposed to? So as a result, it's like, you know what? I want more like a Radiohead vibe. Right. Like, and so I want like someone like, we know James and I got the song covered. We want you to be that you're the structure.
That's true.
Or you're the flavor guy, or
Well, I was hoping, unless they were looking for somebody who's just going to sit back there and play the major chords, which is something I could.
But Billy has to sing.
No,
right?
Yes, totally.
So my guess is he has, right? So my guess is he gets the simpler part and then he breaks out the solo, right?
Yeah,
so you need
totally.
to do the part, like the 13 other guitars I played on this track.
Yeah,
you cover for it.
That the other guitar player's not playing. Yeah. That's what you play.
Yeah.
And so at some point, I guess over the weekend too, I said, well, I spent a lot of time learning. It took a while because I wanted to get an idea of what it would take to learn.
Did you send in your tape? Did you send it?
No way.
Whoever that guy is gets like one shot during the show
I
to
would
show
totally.
that he's got chops. But the rest of it is like, if I'm going, even like, and I don't love them, but if I'm going to a Smashing Pumpkin show, if Billy Corgan's not taking the solos, I'm like, what the fuck
he's got it.
What am I doing here?
So so like I was saying,
people have never seen them live, so
I spent time in the past. I took 4 days to where, including today, where I think 2 of these songs now I learned from start, like brand new, never knew how to play them. That I feel comfortable playing in a band with, not the Pumpkins, but in a band. And then I said, well, let me look online and let me see how they play this live. And I find a thing from like a couple of years ago, and there is a third guitar player, and they come out. It's an encore song, and he is just like, Billy's got the guitar slung low, and the 2 other guys are playing the stuff, and then he effortlessly rips into that lead, and that sound that he does. And I was like, oh, well, thank God he's still doing that, which is great. Because I was trying to think of like what you guys were saying. Is it a tertiary guy that they need that's more in the background, or do they want some like amazing player that's going to fill in?
I think you have to know all that. I think you have to be that guy, but you're not going to play that.
You're not going to play that.
But I got to lean on you if I want to lean on you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're
the string. So.
But Chris, so you're thinking the middle of the set he gets to do Go Now?
No, that's like I said, that's all right. That guy's not going to be that guy unless it's Evan Dando.
That's the thing. So you think it's like Evan Dando. So now you're going to do like My Drug Buddy in the middle of that. But you think about it, like that would be a smarter call, right? It's like we're going to have.
That's why I'm saying, like, really.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? I'm good. But Billy's probably cheap though. Right, I suspect he probably pays a decent wage, but he's like, I don't want to pay you like you're selling ticket money.
Right?
You're like your valet money, not you're not.
So, what I didn't know is, so what happened to the original bass player? When did she exit the picture?
Oh, a long time ago. Yeah,
like in the 90s or 2000?
Yeah. I want to say she was on that record Adore, which is like record 5 or 6 of the 11.
Yeah,
but I don't know the story at all. But she vanished 20 years ago. That, by the way, that recently blew my mind. Is like this weekend they're talking about how that the movie Mean Girls, like the reboot, is like doing so well, and I'm like, wow, that was like 20 years ago, and so they did a remake, and I'm like,
get a reboot, right?
I'm like, oh my gosh, like we are of that age where like 2004, that's like yesterday.
I know. Yeah. It's a blink of an eye. It's frightening.
Yeah. Like old is in the 90s.
I know. 20 years is a generation. So it's like, my daughter's friends they know of that movie and the new one's coming out. And it's like, great. There's one for our age group.
Yeah.
And it's funny, like the older my kids get, like kids' movies are kids' movies. So they can still relate to, say, Home Alone when they were younger. But as they get older, you're just like, oh, this is a great movie, unless it's classic Western, like we're gonna like a genre movie,
or just a
but otherwise, like anything, they're just like, even Breaking Away, they're just like boring. You're like,
oh wow,
really?
So I would think your kids into biking, like they would.
Tell me about it. I thought
but I guess ultimately. Like, it's not like we really liked that movie because it was about biking. It was about the competition. So maybe if you know about biking, this is kind of BS.
Did they make
the movie was about any kind of competition or any of that kind of stuff.
Did they make a new version of it?
No. But that's the whole. We're talking about like movies that like so my son, like, it's funny. This weekend we watched Swing Time with. Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, right?
Oh my God!
1936. Because my son like is really big on the 30s. Yeah, and so it was like I'm trying to get him like, hey, we should watch Stand By Me. I'm like, we should watch Stand By Me. That's like a good coming of age like movie, blah blah blah, and he's like he's like now reading like they're going to start reading Catcher in the Rye at school. I'm like, I love
there we
the
go.
book. And he's saying, it's kind of boring. I don't like, Holden Caulfield. He's kind of a jerk. It's like, you're like, okay, yeah, it's a different.
He's a rich
experience.
snob going to a boarding school.
Yeah, friggin' Upper West Side kid.
And then he trucks down to the city and stays in a hotel.
Yeah.
Spoiled rich kid.
Fuck you.
One other thing I'll say about the Pumpkins is that in the video I watched, Billy Corgan looks like Uncle Fester now.
He always looked like Uncle Fester. Paul dropped that reference. It's like he was good when he had hair. Or was that you, Chris?
Yeah, it was me.
He was dressed in but now he dresses like Uncle Fester as well. He's taken a whole part.
Pretty early on, like when you think about it, it's like it's probably over 30 years ago that Pavement dropped that, that Out on Tour with the Smashing Pumpkins line.
Literally, it's probably 30 years ago this year. Right. Like it was like 94, yeah.
And when you heard it, you're like, yep,
and Stone Temple Pilots too, right? That was the other thing.
Do you think
it went out there?
Do you think after the audition, and he's thinking of hiring you bring that up, and it's just like, get him out of here?
No, that's your audition.
Coming to play.
Hey, do you know any Pavement?
Yeah. Next, get out of here, you.
Right? Do you guys know? Do you remember the song "The Power of the Picket Fence"? The one with their ode to REM. It's a good one.
No, I don't know. I actually do not know Pavement.
It's called "The Power." The Power of the Picket Fence, I believe.
I'm sure if I heard it, because their titles mean like nothing, but when you hear the song, you're like,
exactly.
oh yeah, yeah.
True. I always liked it. Anyway.
Yeah. So what's this about movies? We're talking. There was.
Early, like on one of the threads we had mentioned, we were talking about Beatle acting, the acting Beatles and stuff like that.
Yeah, like Ringo Starr and Caveman. I saw that one.
It's been a long time since I've seen that, but I can remember the last time I saw it. It is what it is, but it's not horrible. Like, oh, this is horrible. Like, I can't even watch it. And it might be just my Ringo thing,
So I was going to say after our conversation, I kind of looked up to see who did films, and I completely forgot. George was the film guy. Like he didn't act; he produced all those films.
Sure, of course.
Ringo essentially hangs it up once he does "Give My Regards, Broad Street." He's like, "I'll do."
Paul McCartney, by the way.
Yeah, but Ringo's in it. That's the thing. It's like that is literally like his last acting role.
Is that right?
Of any length. Like after that, he's the conductor, the narrator conductor on Shining Time Station and Thomas the Train, but he doesn't make any movies after that. There's a couple cameos where he's Ringo.
He doesn't need to. He was recovering.
So he's never done a movie when he's sober. Is what you're saying? Because I was looking. So I look up and so like this is what I pulled up. I found Ringo does Candy in 1968, which I hear is pretty horrible. He does The Magic Christian.
That's with Candy is with Peter Sellers.
Yes, and The Magic Christian is with Peter Sellers too.
Agreed. And Magic Christian, his acting is taken seriously enough though during the Peter Jackman movie that you see that he has to he's got to be at this place. They move
the filming a little,
and and it pushes the Beatles of all. Wow, that didn't.
Yeah. Oh, you mean in the Get Back stuff? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because they still haven't figured out what they're doing. By the way, I'm going to do a little side here. So I didn't know this, but I was apparently starting in like early November of '68, which the White Album is done. It's dropping around Thanksgiving. They start talking about that they're going to do live shows, or at least a live show, an intimate live show at the Roundhouse in London. They talk about it. It's in like the NME. There's like a press release, details to follow. There'll be a contest about the show, and And essentially, this is what evolves into we're going to then do, like, we're going to do it in, at an old amphitheater. We're going to do we're going to do, like, all of the talk you hear them, like, that started of what are we going to do, but we're going to do something live. Like 60 days before the cameras start rolling for Get Back, when you still see them talking about it. Like, this keeps feeling the reason the Beatles broke up is because Brian did everything, like, organized everything. Like, they were incapable of, like, having any organization. Like, right, you get, like, after this, like, Brian would tell them, you need to show up here, and one of those things was, you show up, go make a record, right? That's where they were left alone. But otherwise, be here, do this, and they got to say yes or no, as opposed to figuring out what the hell it is. Or at most, Paul would say, we want to do this, and then Brian would put it all together. Like, even in the Mal Evans book, it would be, the one of the recurring things is, like, John will be like, I need apples, Mal, and Mal would go get apples. Like, it wasn't like you needed to, like, they knew how to go buy apples. You know what I mean? It, like, they didn't even know how to do that. Like, collect them. Like, and Mal for one time didn't have picks with him. And after that, he always carried picks. Everybody around the Beatles carried picks because they would be asked for them. And so that's how they even get guitar picks. It was pretty amazing. Like,
I know, but is it you're saying that they didn't know how to do it, or was it like they can't?
It just happened to them.
I know, but is it more of like they can't go out in the public to go to a store and get something because it'll be?
I think that, like, pretty early on, like, people are arranging their passports for them. They are, they stopped carrying money. They're like, they just, like, they stopped carrying money. Identification. It was like, who I am, and that was that. Like,
it's funny
that happened early.
And Tony, I appreciate. It's because they can't. No, why would they ever have had to since 1963 or 62 even?
That's amazing,
right? And so it's
definitely by 63, 62.
So, yeah. But I'm saying certainly
in
by
Liverpool.
Say by, like, certainly by the middle of 63 for sure. They're like they literally can't walk outside. Like, it's tough. In the UK, but the whole concept of even, like, Magical Mystery Tour, it was like, where is everything? They're like, we're just gonna do, and it was like they didn't realize that things don't just happen because they say them, but that's how their life had been. Like, everything they did, because there was, they really had, like, Brian was amazing, and even so, Mal and Neil still continued to do that for them, but Brian kept it even more structured, and it made them do one of the. So I'm reading this really great book that this guy wrote, who it's called 1963. Right, and it's every single day of 1963, and so he knows where they are. So he documents what they're doing that day. He talks about what the press coverage or what interviews they did that day, or what they, the BBC radio they did, or the press they did. But then they had an open call for people to tell their Beatles stories, and so they put all these ads in the papers, and so it's like they most of the time they end up talking to somebody who's on the bill with the show, like an opening act or whatever. But one of the most fascinating things, so these are like, they're backstage and they're hearing stories, and so where I'm up to now, this is June, it's Paul's 21st birthday, which famously happens in Liverpool at Auntie Gin, his aunt's house, where this is where John beats up Bob Wooler, who asks him about his wink, wink, nudge, nudge trip with Brian Epstein to Spain, insinuating that they had a gay relationship. And John's drunk, and John, like, the story is either he broke his ribs or something, and Brian Epstein has to drive him to the hospital, and so they had a show the night before, and one of the things that John said, he's like something. Brian says, like, oh, you should play this song or whatever, and John snaps at Brian going, hey, you don't do this. you're now crossing the line. You don't tell us this part of the business. And so
we'll take care of the music and you stick to your percentages, Brian.
Yes, right. And it was like, and it's funny because it's that early that John is like, snap, like, no, but it's pretty amazing. I think that might have been either the last time or, but Brian's like, he creates a space for them to be creative and gives them timelines and pushes them.
There's a story about Brian saying something in the studio as well, and like immediately there's some pushback on that. Like he's just like, yeah, that was great. Try another one, And there was like, whoa, There's no doubt about that.
It's funny. They seem to all be like there was. I
didn't realize Auntie Jen lived right in Liverpool. I thought he has relatives in Scotland. Well, John has relatives in Scotland.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that she was right in Liverpool.
The story talks about how there's the word gets out because Jerry and the Pacemakers are there, and
Billy J. Kramer.
Billy J. Kramer's there. Yeah,
there's a bunch of all the top Liverpool bands are there.
Exactly. And so as a result,
really, Brian Epstein's stable has already grown to those guys.
Exactly. And so there's like a crowd on the street, and Auntie Jen talks to the press and saying how they were so well behaved. We're so thankful. It really could have been a problem if they didn't. But also, it's funny you mentioned the Foremost, is one of the guys, apparently, not only did John have his Bob Willer issue, he apparently was they played the Foremost, and John was heckling them, and then he was kind of harassing this woman, and one of the guys from the Foremost is like, I'm going to clock him, and one of the other guys in the Foremost, you clock John Lennon, our career is over. And he's like, you're right, because it'll be like, I could see the headline tomorrow. Some dumb shit.
I didn't know that
punches
one.
John Lennon.
Lennon said to Billy Kramer, they had words, and he was just like, "We're the tops."
Well, that was when what was their first hit was number one, and For Me to You was number two, and he's like, "We're now Brian's number one" or something like that, and John just bites him,
but this is at Paul McCartney's birthday, there. He took on everybody that day.
But they're actually all on tour together too. It's even with Roy Orbison,
they were embarrassed by to do. It's like Muhammad Ali and not Foreman, Larry Holmes, when Larry Holmes was a sparring partner, and he's just like, champ, go down. He was embarrassed. So Roy Orbison, to those guys on that tour, to get back to that, he was the god, and that people were not. I don't know. They were rowdy. They were disrespectful. I'm not going to say booing Roy Orbison, but it was like the Beatles started to top the bill.
Well, but they were just really loud. Yeah, Roy seems the way they say it is Roy goes, look, I'm going to get paid more money anyway. I'm getting paid the same anyway, so I'm more than happy to let them go.
Roy's a champ,
And they talk about but Roy still does his thing where he it's just him and his voice with no microphone, and just blowing people's minds. They're all they're kids. I mean, these are all it's literally 12 to 16-year-olds.
You kind of make the same case for the Beatles, at least from when we got to know the Beatles. So it's a generation later, we get to know the Beatles. And the Beatles to us, they were four guys standing pretty stock still. Their Hamburg days were long gone. And I love that stylized look that they had. That they were wearing suits and they're just these four kind of, skinny, guys standing up there, bringing it. For me, to my ears, I was just like, holy smokes! These guys are doing it. Even on songs like From Me to You that are more vocal songs, I was just these guys got something special, and it was. it wasn't cool. Like in my little circle of friends on the cul-de-sac that I grew up in North Jersey, like that wasn't cool.
Well, it's such a different, such a different time, because that's even, as
because it's all 8 years later or something like that.
But I sent you that quote where they're all like, all of the opening acts, like the locals that are like, so they're out on the road, they're opening. This is, so pre-Roy, there is the tour where they're opening for Chris Montez and Tommy Rowe. Right,
so they were picking up locals on the road, which I never hear any of those stories.
So they do two. So the typical setup is they do like a 6:15 show, and then like an 8:15 show, and then that 90 minutes of shows, it's Chris Montez and Tommy Rowe do like an hour of it, right? The Beatles do like 15 minutes, and then there's like a local or two that come out and do 10 minutes, and the locals though are all doing shadows. It's all Cliff in the shadows, and so John's like, they're still not the top of the bill, but they already have a hit they have a number one with Please Please Me, but they're not Americans, right? They're even the British people are like, oh well, they're not Americans. That's not what this is. Our local. Oh, it's great. The local one hit. Artists, like they're still, they're not Chris Montez, which, Let's Dance, and so. By
the way, when you say that, you're right, but it also goes to prove that like Love Me Do didn't really move the needle all that much outside of Liverpool.
All the fan conversations are like, oh, I really liked Love Me Do. It's like I first heard them, right, and then and Please Please Me was great. Right, and that's what they're on the road with their first number one is on its way to number one and his number one, and then they book the Roy tour. So this is like leading up to whatever. The Roy tour doesn't start till like May of '63, so this is earlier '63. And John is telling the other acts, it's like, yeah, you got to move beyond this shadow stuff. Like we do like the blues based stuff or whatever. So it's. Like what the Beatles are doing that is considered like it's kind of radical. Like no one else. Like they're almost reviving the old school rock and roll. It's perceived as, rather than the shadows kind of mellowy stuff. And so you talk to like, so occasionally some of the interviews with people who've then seen them like in May or so, they're like, oh, I love Roy Orbison, and I'd seen the Beatles at the Caverns a couple times and they were great and blah blah blah, and then I saw them here and it's like, this is the last time I saw them. This is what I'm really happy for their success, but like I saw them at the Cavern, or I saw them at Litherland, like that was the rock and roll band I loved, and they did 2 hours. Now I pay twice as much money to see them do 30 minutes of like their harmonies, and I can't hear it because the Screaming Girls, where I got 2 hours and 2 sets for 50p. It's like, and so a lot of them are, it's like if frequently you hear is we're happy for them, but we've lost our band. Like our Liverpool band has gone and become a national band, and we've lost them. And they're the
Beatles talk themselves about like having to go back to Liverpool and live that down almost. They definitely copped an attitude about Liverpool, like being more provincial as well. All the things that they kind of that made them, they did. They kind of abandoned Liverpool after '63.
Right, when people talk about like, oh, you saw the Beatles at Shea Stadium or whatever, it's like, well, yeah, you only saw them. We occasionally play the game of like, oh, if time travel, what would you like? Like to me, like one of the shows I would love to see is like the Beatles right after coming back from Germany playing like that,
the Leatherman show. That's the
like
one.
December '61. Like not even like they haven't written a song yet. It's like that's the band you want to see.
The one with Chas Newby on the bass guitar.
Yeah, the only problem is you don't get Ringo. Like maybe the Ringo, the first 1 or 2 Ringo shows are the ones you want to see
at the Cavern, right?
Yeah,
but what is it about that period? Like they're like in their groove. They're on, they're like a tight unit.
Like 4 hours every day.
And it's punk rock, Tony. It's like they
just
are
raw, straight ahead,
and great.
Right.
and they're doing R&B covers. They're doing, like, but deep, and that was one of the things that made them distinct is they would dig up B-sides, like these songs that now that you know like not even like Some Other Guy, but like even like Chains or Boys. Like it was like these bands competed
the
to
cookies.
like find the cookie.
It's like the fact that these males were also doing female, like stuff. Like we're doing the Marvelettes.
Like the fact that like, the Beatles were like on national, BBC radio live performances. Probably the first time anyone in the UK heard Motown. You know what I mean? It's like they were digging deep. Yeah. So I don't, they were huge fans, and they were almost. It was like. But it wasn't like it was underground to do that. It's like there were like rock bands were from like the north and they were like just club performers, and they like that's where there were so many bands in Liverpool and Manchester. Like London was like Cute Guy and the So-and-Sos was like the kind of the thing.
What do you think that is, though, John? Like, when you talk about when we think about the Rolling Stones are doing Little Red Rooster, and they're going even further back into the blues to like the John Lee Hooker types, and the Beatles are doing nearly of the moment Motown and stuff like that. And it's a different. Was that a calculated, was there any kind of thing with that? Was that a Southern English thing where it's just like we're going to do the blues, man? Like So it's funny. There's a long history of that where like there was what the Stones were doing comes out of the whole what was called Trag Jazz, which was really like New Orleans stuff and playing like obsessively traditional music, like jazz beyond like 1920 was considered like oh, that's modern, whereas you would like the way you'd be obsessed with that. And so real folk blues was the Muddy Waters and the Chess records, which kind of which was introduced by the guys who played that trad jazz. Like it was a much broader definition of what folk blues, and that was actually called rhythm and blues too, right? So that in the UK, so there was a guy who was like a trombonist who put together these bands, and even like Pete Townsend was the banjo player in a trad jazz band. Like they were, and out of that was Alexis Corner and the guys that started the pure blues nights at like the different clubs, like at the Marquee, and from those, the obsessives of those, which were the Brian Joneses and the Keith, but Chuck Berry fell into that group. Like he wasn't a rock and roller; he was kind of like a chess guy, right? Like the fact that he was on Chess Records and Muddy Waters. So there was the people who played that obsessively, and the Stones were for lack of a better example, like the Elvis, like it became the packageable, like cute young boy version of it. And how are the Beatles? How does that work again with the Beatles sneaking that into the Cavern? Then, like the Cavern is a.
Well, that was
Trag Jazz. They're definitely doing that. Yeah. It's Trad Dad, by the way.
Yeah, the movie Trad Dad. Yeah.
and so the Beatles, like,
who is it?
Is it Bob Waller? Like they'd be like, cut out that bloody rock and roll.
It was the owner of the Cavern. It was the only. That was the thing is the Cavern was a jazz club, and so it was Trad Jazz. And it's like,
how are they walking in, and what are they doing to get even in the door?
There was Skiffle. So Skiffle was
that's right.
There's Skiffle, right? But then they start
reminding me,
right? And so they're doing Skiffle, and it's just like, wait a second, Everly Brothers isn't Skiffle. It's like they would like work in. It's like, yeah, I know that you're moving from skiffle to rock and roll. I know that, right? And it was like, and they got slapped down because
so skiffle is just folky enough to have been acceptable at
very
the
much so, because remember they're doing Rock Island Line, and they're doing like that's like I highly recommend the Billy Bragg book about the history of skiffle, because it covers everything what I was just talking about as far as like the deep, like this came at a very traditional thing, and the whole skiffle thing is like 18 months. It's like it's 50
that quick, a year and a half.
But it essentially takes everyone. It puts guitars in like young teenagers' hands for the first time, and then the Shadows put electric guitars into people's hands, and that's why it wasn't Americans. It took it literally from the guitar, and then at the same time electric guitars are becoming loud enough now, right, that now they're not just a rhythm. Guitars before like this time are just rhythm instruments. Right, they're not loud enough.
Which brings me back around to the Stones, in the sense that the Stones are their own guys, and you have to give them credit for that. You know what I mean? Like, they are not influenced by the Beatles at that point. Like when they first started, like they're the Rolling Stones, and
literally
they're their own.
in early '63, like while they're on they're near London, and someone in the peripheral takes them to go see the Stones at the Quartet Club, and the Beatles are like, wow, this is great, and they hang out, and they like go back to like the shitty place where Brian and Keith and Mick live, and they talk about this is so great that people are like,
because you are doing what we used to do in Hamburg too.
There's a lot of
music.
That.
Right.
Yeah, we're not doing this shadow shit. You know, we're not we're. It's great that we're having success playing the music.
George immediately goes to Decca, right? Like Decca was looking for somebody, and he was just like, check out the Rolling Stones out of Richmond.
Absolutely, the Stones owe George kudos for recommending them, for sure. That's how they get their deal.
And I don't know, going beyond the Rolling Stones, that any other British band that of that pop, British invasion era can make the same claim. I don't know. Like, if you told me that the Kinks were their own fellas, doing
the Kinks were absolutely, yes, the Kinks for sure, and then bands that weren't as successful, like the Pretty Things, absolutely, but the Pretty Things never really happened, But in the U.S. for sure, but the Kinks for sure, the Kinks like that always gets under Ray's craw. Like Ray was playing with like jazz bands as the guitarist, and it's funny when we say jazz, it's not American jazz. It is like this more traditional jazz. It's not bebop and Miles.
It's a little like what Elvis Costello does now.
Yes, very much so. That's because that's his world too. It's like they're all obsessed with they're all of these bands from that period. Like one of their heroes they're blown away by is Georgie Fame. Like Georgie Fame led this band, and they all love it.
I rarely has heard a disparaging word.
Yeah, about I learned how to sing by going back and listening to Georgie Fame. Like he really, like amazing singers say that all the time. It's like his band was ridiculously good, and they
Elvis Costello's father is a jazz musician and has a band.
Yes.
And what is that music of this type that you're mentioning?
No. He's definitely more of he's a dance band. It's in like the adult version of it, but they would play the hits of the day. And one of the things in Elvis's book, he talks about his dad would get acetates of the latest songs before they came out, so the band could play them on the radio or on the way. And so he has all of like these white labels of the Beatles singles, because he would get them, and he still it's funny the way he writes about them. He's so excited that I still have them. It's like
It's a treasure.
And so that's why Elvis has such a encyclopedic knowledge of music and hits. It's like his dad would have to know the charts, and it was a really amazing upbringing that you're surprised he didn't get more of a leg up, but it was a different generation. Elvis went a different route. So, but anyway, we're
I didn't know that about the Kinks, by the way. I thought the Kinks owed a debt to the Beatles more so than like I didn't know that they could make that claim, like it to have not been influenced at all.
Ray made a big stink, particularly like when it's like there's a famous where Ray reviews the Revolver. And he kind of shits all over Revolver because, everyone seems to be so excited that they're introducing Indian sounds. It's like, well, we have this record from last year, because his wife is Indian. And it's like, there's like a raga drone to it. And it's like, no one got all excited about that.
But that's 1965 he's saying that. You know what I mean? Like,
but you remember, so that's the other thing when you put the charts together. So the British chart, I mean, You Really Got Me is like the biggest song, like November of 64. Like it's like both You Really Got Me and All Day and All the Night are in the top 10 songs of 1964. So really arguably the Animals get credibility because they were doing what the Stones were doing up north.
True. Yep.
Right?
Animals. You're right. Animals.
Right. And the Yardbirds are actually on. They're brought on as guests as part of like the Beatles pantomime, the Christmas shows of '64. So
did they play those? Is that right? Who's in that lineup? Who's the guitarist? I should say.
Eric's. In fact, that's kind of the end of it, right? Like in January of '65 is when For Your Love comes out, and that's when Eric says, like, I'm done. I'm not doing this pop shit. I'm here to do the blues. But I mean, Eric, like, is a notorious asshole that continues to this day, even when sometimes people think he's a nice guy.
I don't hear like all the stuff I've read. I've never read that Eric and like they struck up a friendship that like that's the earliest, well, clearly they met him then, they met him and they had the strike up.
But Eric's gone. Like the Eric George relationship, because Eric's the only one who really has George's the only one who really has a relationship with him.
Did that start right then and there?
That starts because Eric shows up and plays something on like late '67, like some incidental music. It might be for Candy. It might be for Ringo's.
No, he plays on the Wonderwall music record. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, but I think one might beget the other, right? Like, but it's around. It's so when George goes to
Wonderwall music comes out in
'68, right? So Eric plays, right? So when George goes to India and they records music that ends up there, and including the Inner Light when he's in India. They have the Indian music, and then George, and then Eric contributes to other music for the movie soundtrack that they're making in India that George is doing. Is that Wonderwall?
On Apple Records too. It's the original cut.
It's actually, of course, like that's not a record that like is highly imprinted. Like that.
And you asked about it, and I have it in my hand. I love this record. I love the Wonderwall record a lot. I like George's influences. I like this better than George's contribution to say Sgt. Pepper. I'd rather listen to the indie music.
You mentioned this album before. Can you explain a little bit to me? I'm unfamiliar with this.
Wonderwall music. So it's I can't remember because it's not a soundtrack. It is a soundtrack, but it's not but it's not listed as like soundtrack. It just says George Harrison Wonderwall music.
Yeah,
it's a soundtrack to a film.
Yeah, I think it's all the music he recorded, but I think some of it wasn't. Like all of it's not in the movie kind of thing. It's like, it's like one of those things where he made this album inspired by, and the music is included in.
But I also think part of that is he goes to India and he records the 40 Indian musicians, and he just records a whole bunch of stuff, and then that gets edited into a lot of that becomes, just like, well, I'm going to use this here, and that's what he ends up using for the record and stuff like that. Eric Clapton comes in and plays on, there's all kinds of stuff on it. There's Indian music on it. There is rock and roll music on it. But they're not songs. So you don't listen to it and go, oh, that song. Like there's parts that like Paul is ripped off for cell songs just because it's instrumental, you know. And we fell in love with this one little riff, and then you found out that I think it's actually Eric Clapton playing the riff, and oh my God, like at some point I have to go and find it again. But I saw that someone had used it, a band had used it. Boy, I found it, I'm going to say 15 years ago at least. And I really liked it a lot. This band wrote a song around the riff. And and I think I heard that George Harrison had heard it and was not a fan of people's pinching his music. But at the same time, he was like, oh, but that's a good one. Like he admired this. And when I find it, I'll send it to you guys just because you should hear it.
So,
but now I got to look for it again.
Well, so I looked up the credits, and so Ringo and Eric play on Skiing, and there's also, and then there's also on the movie there's more music, and Peter Tork from the Monkees actually plays banjo on it, but he wasn't allowed to play. He wasn't allowed to be on the record because he had a recording contract. So he's in the movie playing the banjo, but it's not on the album. And the other thing is Eric's under a name, a fake name, I think. But the funny thing is, and someone pointed out, what was George's first band? Like there was like a trio he played with back in Liverpool before he was even in the Beatles, and that's Eric's name on it, and it has the guy's name is
Les Stewart. Les Stewart Trio? Les Stewart Trio?
Oh, I gotta remember. Is Eddy Clayton? That's the name. Yes, that's the name, and that's Eric's name.
You better look up Les Stewart then, damn it. Because who the hell was that? Because I didn't make that up.
Yeah, I'm taking that name.
I'm sure there's a lot of people in the UK with that name.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, the Les Stewart Beatles. He's like a guitarist that was kicked out. But I thought George played with him. I thought George.
There's so many. Les Stewart Quartet, a band George Harrison played in from '59. So it was a George band, but it's not Eddy Clayton. Because it's funny, is people are like, oh, Eddy Clayton. Oh, I guess that's why Eric Clapton picked it. But obviously it was George said, why don't you use Eddy Clayton? That's really deep Beatles, I thought. Yeah.
That's good stuff.
Yeah. So, but anyway, that's where George and so there's the December of '64 Yardbirds Beatles. You know, they're doing 3 songs or whatever during the Christmas pantomime, and Eric leaves the band soon after. But they don't reacquaint until they do. Like Eric shows up and plays that one song, or maybe multiple songs, I don't know, but incidental music that gets, some of it ends up on this album in late '67, early '68, and
you
that's
have to wonder though. That's a long time. Like how much did George and Eric, kind of keep in touch?
But it doesn't sound like they did at all. It's from my understanding, it becomes just a set. Because remember,
well, then what makes him go, let's get Eric in on this Indian thing?
I don't think it happens that way. I literally think it's much more, and because you got to remember, London and sessions are just much smaller. Like Eric's out of a job at this time, right? This is
is it like Paul is in the other studio doing
this is
why
right
don't
after
we do it in the road and those guys are in another studio and Eric happens to be there and
I think this is well before the White Album sessions. This is when George is doing his thing. So there's that whole, they do All You Need Is Love, right, in whatever June or July, and then they're working on George is doing this while Paul is working on Magical Mystery Tour, right? And because George actually doesn't contribute a lot to Magical Mystery Tour except for kind of showing up and Blue Jay Bang.
The Beatle guy, like the musicians that are around. So it's like Mick Jagger is at All You Need Is Love taping, the Donovan is in India with them. Eric Clapton is nowhere to be seen.
But yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. That's why the thing that brings what happens is they have this trip planned to India. They're going to go spend 3 months in India in late '67, but Brian dies, and they're going to do this. They figure they have to get this stuff, and so they move the whole trip to early '68. And in the meantime, right, they knock off. They do
Magical Mystery
Tour, and that right, and all of that happens in December, and then George is working on this, and before they take off, and so Wonderwall's in the can, I guess, at this point, as they run in and they do Hey Bulldog in the studio, and they use the footage of them making.
But that's them going in to do the promo for Yellow Submarine.
They're actually, so what they do is they're actually going into the studio to be filmed for the video for Lady Madonna.
Oh, that's right. That's the one.
While they're there, they go, you know what? John's got this great riff, and he wants to do it. So you know what? They're a similar tempo. So why don't let film us recording Hey Bulldog, but we'll cut it up and use the audio of Lady Madonna, and that's the video. So the video of Lady Madonna is actually them recording Hey Bulldog, and so they get that in the can, and they go, and then they go off to India, knowing they're going to go off to India for 3 months, even though Ringo only makes it like 2 weeks. I think Paul makes it a month, and George and John make it 2 months. And so somewhere around there is when Wonderwall get recorded, and in that sort of 3 or 4 month period. I'm still not quite 100% sure if Wonderwall's it's recorded in India, like the first part of it, but not the Eric part.
I think I thought he was just out recording musicians, and I'm going to record without even a thought about Wonderwall. I'm going to record these Indian musicians.
There is a little. Okay, we need to go and do some research, because I know there's the Americanized version, because George had works for them to perform, and the line I remember is the Indian music. Like George was so excited about them doing the Indian musicians performing this music. It's oh great, this is really authentic, and the Indian musicians were like, wow, this is such Western music. When George is thinking it's Eastern, and the Eastern musicians thinking it's so Western, right? And it was kind of.
I don't know that. I've never heard that angle before. I thought he was just recording them because he wanted to record them, and then later it was just I got a place for that.
But they do the Inner Light too. That's George has these lyrics for the Inner Light, and they record, and that's all of that performance from the Inner Light was recorded in India, and George, and the only other Beatle on Inner Light is Paul doing harmonies. I think he might play a little percussion or something like that too, but it's only George and Paul on that track. So anyway,
I didn't even know. I wasn't sure that
we went super deep nerd Beatles.
You guys are that's you guys, yeah. And I don't know why when I try to describe you as Beatles experts, you walk attack. You guys, you know so much about their activities in their lives. It's incredible. It just rattles off the top of your head.
Well, John's reading the Mal Evans book.
I finished it.
Did I hear you did finish it? Okay.
Yeah. Hold on, we're gonna be wrapping up. That might have to be.
Well, I know.
Yet again.
I'm just kind of.
It's quick. It's a really quick. Is the Mal book? It's not. It's very interesting, but the Beatles stuff itself is kind of Mal kind of. There's a couple things where he gets a little deeper, because you have sort of this firsthand information. But to me, the most interesting part, the thing I learned more about, is when the Beatles go and hang out with Elvis in Hollywood. Yeah. And
what year?
And this is 65.
Okay.
And but even before that,
the jam. Does he remember a jam?
They do. Yeah, they do say that they played, and they were there for hours. They were, and it was a lot of but they never. But he doesn't say, "Oh, they did Mustang Sally" or something like. You don't hear any. There's not enough detail there. But the thing that I found is a couple times it's like. So Mal's really tight with Paul. He's like living in the same space with him sometime, or is like he kind of moves from beetle to beetle.
He did live at Cavendish, didn't he?
And, yes, right. He did. And so one of the things, and that's where there's a whole thing where he writes. He contributes to "She's Leaving Home," and even like it's kind of like him and Paul sort of brainstorm Sergeant Pepper's because it was kind of a joke on salt and pepper. And Sergeant Pepper, and they kind of rip that. And so Paul tells Mal, "I'm going to give you writing credit on She's Leaving Home," and there's one other one because he actually contributed a couple lines. And then they decided, you know what, we'll still give you royalties, but we don't want to mess with the Lennon McCartney credit. But then he never even got any money.
Yeah, of course.
So
is he bright?
Hang on now.
It's interesting. He's a voracious reader. He's kind of a big kid. He's so obsessed with them. He loves them so much and wants to do it. It does almost seem like he is such a, not a sycophant, but he's blinded. It's amazing the relationship he has with his wife is he's never there. She's in Liverpool and he's living in London. He goes to LA for 3 months and then comes back home. It's insane. It's insane.
It's part of my job. It's my job. It's my job.
But
honey, I gotta go.
40 pounds a week. But he obviously very much loves his wife, but then he's not with his wife. And so then I fall in love with this person, and there is an intense immaturity, an emotional immaturity that's going on.
That's different than stupid, because in my head, I guess I've always thought, I don't know why I just fell into the trope that Neil was the bright one, and Mal was the dopey one. Bring the amps over.
Not dopey, but
dopey. Though, and I don't mean that in a not stupid.
Yeah. No, you're right though. You're right. Neil sees a bigger picture, and Mal's just they want chocolate. I will get chocolate by hook or crook. Or my job is to get them out of this building safely. So we're going to send them, we're going to send a fake van here. You know what I mean? It's he's very clever and he knows, he's such a networker. He literally knows how to get mandolin strings at 3 o'clock in the morning in Austin, Texas. You know what I mean? It's those, he's
a fixer.
Yeah, he absolutely is a fixer. But if you asked him to figure out in 3 months, we're thinking about this bigger plan. He is it, and he just happens to be in the right place at the right time. It's you're now the head of artist and development for Apple, and then inside of 2 weeks, it goes from him to Neil to Peter Asher, right? And it's okay, now it makes sense. Peter Asher can do this. But then Mal is the guy who finds the Ivies and is obsessed with them.
Produces the first record.
Exactly. and right? Because but it's almost because
that's Badfinger to
everyone
you,
keeps they become Badfinger, right? And he keeps it alive. But the one thing that I'll tell you through the book though is George is such a fucking great guy. George is such Paul is really nice, but then when you're not needed, Paul is not nice. And John, you see John evolve over the course of the book. For whatever it is, Yoko definitely makes John grow up for even though she's mother, he becomes a much more he becomes much more respectful of women. He becomes much more he understands that there's other people's point of views. He breaks them all out of over time they all break out of their this closed world where they you know, it's either like Linda with Paul does it and Yoko with, you know, but like George is the one guy who's there for Mal when he needs him. He's the guy who, like, he pays for the funeral. He pays for, like, and George is the guy who's like, hey, you know, Mal, like I'm going to help you out with, there's a band that actually, going back to the movies, there's a movie, the first movie George produces is called like Little Malcolm or something like that. And there's a band in it that Mal is like, sees himself in the 70s now as like a manager, a producer, and he's trying to get things going, because after the Badfinger situation, which he gets almost no credit for, and most of that is really Alan Klein, who just says like I want to get rid of you. Like, why are you on my payroll? Get out. Even though he has a hit with Badfinger, it just sort of go away. You're not one of them. You're in the way of my control. And so
does Paul McCartney produce If You Want It though?
He writes it. I think he does.
I think he
you know
does.
What it is? No, you know what it is? Is he does a demo, and he's like, you have to do it exactly like my demo.
So does Mal produce that?
Mal's in the. I think Mal produces no matter what. Like that. Like with George, there's.
I think you're right.
You know, so it's kind of like when they're sort of forgotten, If You Want It is kind of like, oh, that's Beatles magic. So,
but
Mal,
that's also written by Paul. It has that seal of approval.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. But that's all within the Beatles realm. So Mal does something, does the stuff later.
I'm just trying to think of what it would be that would marginalize him. You know, right from the get-go. That's the thing.
Yeah. Well, so we could go on and on, but ultimately, what I love about is George comes off as a great George can be cold. Like, eventually, Mal, when the Beatles dissolve, Mal says okay, I'm leaving. I'm going on my own. And John writes this heartfelt note oh, blah blah blah. And they still, and so John, he's in the Hollywood Vampire kind of group with the Harry Nilsson stuff, and Paul actually reaches out to him and wants him to road manage the Wings Over America tour, right? So he reaches out to him, so he's valuable there. But it's so when Mal calls up each of them and says, I just want you to know I'm quitting. I need to leave. This is because he's still at 40 pounds a week or something like that. And George goes, so what? It was kind of cold, but it was sort of the right thing to do. Why really you need it okay for you to go anyway. I just so much more respect for George after reading that book.
I always liked that George, it would always send home. They were all prolific, postcard writers and letter writers and stuff like that. But I always Paul, George, just dear mom and dad, because he had a big family and stuff.
So
and
just for the next episode, there's a lot about George's mom and postcards too. So anyway,
well, so we could pick that conversation up next week. Yeah, it's interesting stuff. Yeah, this was the book that was 1,800 pages. Or that was a different book.
No, this is it's called Living the Beatles Legend. Came out in November.
Okay.
They finally got access to Mal's diaries.
Didn't you have the 1,800 page book?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, that's the Lewisham book though. That's the full unabridged.
Well, I just wanted to get the info on this book, get it on.
It's the latest. It was definitely the Beatles book of 2023 for sure.
Oh,
it was not the only, but it was the one.
Okay, well, that you're a good reference, a good referral. All right, well, you've been listening to The Beatdown. If you haven't guessed it yet.
If you're still here.
Yeah. The Beatdown is available on Apple and Google and CastBox. Subscribe to us and know when a new episode is available. Have something to say, send us an email at thebeatdownmusicpodcast@gmail.com. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Facebook. Like us on our, you can request stuff, or give us a recommendation on Apple. That would be great. And as always,
Beatdown Facebook page?
Sure. Well, our stuff gets posted on Facebook as part of our agreement. Thanks as always. Thanks for listening. How many more years
do we have on that deal?
We're gonna. It's in litigate. We'll get it back in the litigation. Can just keep that thing turning over. Thanks as always for listening.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Yeah, Happy New Year.
I got to come on in, honey. Open the door. Open the door. Let me in. Let me in. Let me in. Let me ease on in. Mama, got to come.